12 o'clock, Draco. Shall I start the webinar?
Hello. Welcome to Competency Counts, Building a Stronger Structure in Construction. This is a virtual event presented by Raise Build, and today we've gathered a panel of experts to discuss the importance of competency in the construction industry. We've got a great lineup to give us a range of unique perspective on the topic of competency and its impact on construction projects. Without further ado, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and share a brief overview of their views on competency in construction. And we will start with Peter McAteer, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter McAteer. I'm the CEO of a company called Sysmax. And I'm probably the oddball in this group of people in so much as I don't come from this sector. But I do come from a deep past in the subject of competence and the impact of it. So I was offshore the night of the Piper Alpha disaster in the UK, the largest disaster in the history of the oil and gas industry anywhere on the planet, and spent the worst night of my life as 167 people lost theirs, and was involved in the emergency response activities that took place and subsequent legislation, which looked remarkably like the Hackett report. It was called the Cullen report. And that was the first time on the planet that the requirement to prove competency and compliance was brought into an industrial sector. Been intimately involved in that subject ever since, subsequently got involved in the Deepwater Horizon disaster, as Hollywood would have it, where 11 people died. And the findings of that inquiry were the need to prove competency and compliance. Got involved in the Grenfell disaster inquiry for the simple reason that I'd had some extraordinarily bad experience, which I'll perhaps go into later with the housing environment, and I felt guilty. I felt that I could see this going to happen, having been involved in the two previous disasters, and lo and behold, it became a requirement to prove competency and compliance as a result of the Hackett report. A brief introduction to me. I could witter on for a long time on that subject.
Thank you. Debbie, would you like to go next?
Yes, Debbie Carlton. I'm a director of a small micro SME called Dynamic Knowledge. I was a civil engineer in my first career and was very early into sort of what are called learning technologies before the words like e-learning were invented. I now specialize in competency management methodologies and technologies, and to solve lots of competency challenges, of which there are many, including using lots of AI technologies to make sense of competency, knowledge and data so we can help solve these problems. But they're only part of the challenge. There's bigger challenges in terms of culture and change as well. Thanks very much. Thank you.
David, would you like to go next?
Yes, and hello everybody. I'm David Jones. I'm now director of the Institute of Construction Management, one of the directors, and vice president there as well. But I've been in the industry for many decades. I was one of the very first tranche of chartered surveyors that brought CDM, the Construction Design and Management Regulations, into fruition in local authority. We met with the very first Chief Inspector of Construction, and it's been a bit of a mess, a bit of a nightmare since. Picking up from what Peter, his involvement, I too have been involved with the Grenfell. In 1989, I was one of the designers of the very handful, I think there's only about 12 high-rise blocks around the whole UK that were declared fire safe by the BRE, post the Grenfell fire. 8 of them were blocks that I designed in London Borough of Croydon. Unfortunately and sadly, many of you have seen those blocks in the ITV news that are in a deplorable state. The cladding is fine, it's the lack of maintenance and lack of ongoing work on that. So in 2007, I was a senior manager at local authority and first brought online training into local authority for organisational competency. This was early days. We've now moved on, and the work that Debbie is now doing, that we'll hopefully be talking about with the AI and things like that, and digital, will advance all of that. But that's a little bit of mine. I could witter on, but we haven't got a lot of time, and we need to get on to the subject here. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Nick.
Hello everyone, I'm Nick Horton. I've worked at Sapphire for just under 17 years, and we've been very much at the forefront, particularly with balconies, as we've become the largest balcony company in the UK, in having to forge away in an industry which has not got very defined guidelines in terms of competency, in particular in relation to being a niche product and so on. So very much as a company, it's one of our key needs and strategic drives. And I work within Sapphire's. I head up the marketing and early engagement, and also have written white papers for the MHCLG as it was, and been involved in other research in Canada for the local governments over there as well.
Thank you. And Daniel.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Joyeux. I'm the chairman of the group of Ectis, who is dedicated mainly to testing and certification. We are also an approved body for the UK CA marked, and we assess. So we assess by, as I said, by test, but also we may assess also by calculation on expertise. So we assess fire product, fire systems, or building as a whole. And just to introduce, I'm also involved in nuclear plants fire safety since many years, knowing that I started 30 years ago as a fire research engineer. On the nuclear plant, there is a new standard that should be applied, the ISO 19443. That is just to understand your environment. When you work on something, what is your environment and what should be your impact on the environment on which you are working. That should be applied, of course, to nuclear plants, but it may be also easily applied to construction.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for your introduction and for sharing your views on competency. Would like to ask you some questions. Would like to begin with Peter. In what ways can the construction industry demonstrate that they're keeping up with best practices? You're on mute, sorry.
Peter, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. The best way of answering that is to refer to the Deepwater Horizon disaster. So in that situation, the largest oil spill in the history of the oil and gas industry happened because of a few very simple compliance issues that were not done, and other ones that should have been done but hadn't been thought about really. And we were challenged by the industry to take best practice off the bookshelves, off the servers, and place it in the hands of individuals as they do their job. So this is role-based compliance and competency. And it's quite interesting. We have a big history in risk management. We've done over 300 projects internationally, covering all kinds of subjects like the construction of oil fields, about which I should say we start by building the accommodation. That's the easy bit, and then we move on to the rest of it. And what we found over these 300 plus projects was that within the management of risk, we'd over the decades built a body of knowledge called our best practices. That might be ISO standards, it might be corporate best practices, it might be regional best practices, and simply adhering to those with the mitigating actions that came out of more than 99% of our risks. So simply getting people to do what they're supposed to do and monitoring that they do it is a major breakthrough for anybody. If only we did what we're supposed to do, we'd be fine. It's just we don't all the time. And so enabling the distribution of best practice to the individual as they perform their task gives us two things. It gives us reduction of risk because we've got that embodiment of risk within the best practices. It gives us 24/7 monitoring of what's being done and what's not being done, where are our gaps in the organization, and it gives us the body of evidence we need to prove competency. So that delivery of the best practices has phenomenal power. It's difficult to set up, it's difficult to achieve, but once it's done, it's incredible.
Thank you, Peter. That is quite interesting. Would like to move on to Daniel, please. And what do you think are the limits of testing and how important is it to understand them?
Yeah, thank you. First, effectively, testing is a need when you don't know, you need absolutely to have evidence from testing. You are not able to assess it in the other way, knowing that for many products, there are more systems than product. So they are non-homogeneous with different type of materials, how they behave all together. So only testing can give you an answer about what will be the behavior and the performance of the product. Nevertheless, we know that we cannot test everything. So there is development of different standards that may be examples, for example, as extended applications that may help from one configuration of testing, how you can assess a set of product. Nevertheless, the testing as themselves also, it's not enough. There is a need also to understand where the product will behave with the other part of the building, what will be effectively in other conditions, and also how to take into account the installations. Often manufacturers are taking time to install their product in a furnace, where on the other hand, it will be quickly installed in the building. So this gap also has to be filled, and competencies shall be really developed in order to understand this gap between the standardized test that is performed on the installed product that shall keep the same performance as it has been evaluated during testing.
Thank you. Sounds like testing does play quite crucial role. Speaking about testing, Nick, how critical is balcony testing and what kind of limits do balconies have in their product or material?
It's a really good question. Brilliant. It's interesting. Daniel talked about the scenarios you're testing. Testing full stop in the balcony industry is a massively important aspect of things, especially with new products, bringing new products, new solutions to market, which are incredibly important for actually bringing better competency, safer conditions, various other aspects of it. But you need to bring products to market which have been thoroughly tested. And so from our point of view, we've certainly invested in our own test laboratory here at Reading, where we can test full scale side balconies and so on, which is beyond what the test rigs you normally get in the standard test facility have. In terms of answering about the limitations, obviously we've seen big limitations on things like combustible materials, decking and so on, rightly so, now have to be a Class A. We've also seen the whole controversial aspect on laminate glass, and that kind of leads on, in my mind, to knowing the limits of testing, because Daniel was talking about fire testing, and certainly we've done a lot of that with various products and applications for balconies. And it's really important to know what your product isn't able to be used for, and we've seen that obviously in the Grenfell inquiry as well. Sadly, limits which were known but weren't publicly known, if that makes sense. But I think one of those examples would be certain laminate glass products which may have achieved a Class A rating in certain scenarios, but in the reality of general day-to-day use and the way you'd apply that to a balcony, you're probably going to be putting that product in a scenario where it may no longer be a Class A because of the parameters of that test. And that's really, really important to know. I guess the whole point of doing testing is that we know the unknowns, but there still always remains some kind of unknown off the back of that as well. But it's important to be able to demonstrate and articulate that both in early stage engagement with contractors, collaboration with architects and so on, but also as Dame Hackett obviously has identified, is also the way that's articulated in marketing documents and literature and so on, data sheets, etc. David, I'm sure you've probably got a take on that. I know you've been very involved in the JCI. And so
yes, in fact, we are working with a templating of the whole gamut of competence, both individual and organisational, and it's hopefully something that we'll be talking as well with Debbie, with her knowledge of AI and where we're going on these things, and that we can fuse and somehow bring the technologies that we're all looking at on this. But does the industry actually understand what competency is? You know, we keep getting, we keep getting this SKE. Everyone uses this SKE, and now they've used +B, you know, the behaviors. And I use attitude as well on these things. So, but, you know, if you break it down, that's skills, knowledge, and experience or expertise. The skills takes practice. That's all about the practice of learning the skills to actually apply the knowledge. The knowledge is the teaching you're taught. And the experience, you can't teach experience. Experience comes with using the other two skills and knowledge and applying them over time to prove you're competent. You know, so the industry is now with the joint competence initiative that with the envelope sector. And that's a good place to start. But hopefully, I would like to see this whole ethos of competence initiative applied across the industry. In fact, I think we've slightly missed a trick, but we can still pick it up. We're in a political situation of deregulation, serious deregulation with the revocation of European law. Much of our health and safety laws that have been built up over 5 decades have originated in some part of Europe, you know, and now we've got politicians that I don't want to make the political points here, but are hell-bent on getting rid of that. You know, somebody asked me the other day, what happens in the sunset if all of this health and safety and regulations falls off the cliff irretrievably? We then revert back to the 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act. That's still there, and you can apply that. And we've now got the Building Safety Act of 2022, but we don't yet have the secondary legislation. It's coming through. We're second guessing, the industry is second guessing what that secondary legislation is going to be. So we're in an interesting paradigm cultural period now with the industry. We really have got to get this correct now to actually prove competence.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Want to move on to Debbie now, and just ask in what ways, how can the industry utilize intelligent and sustainable solutions to address competency challenges, do you think?
I think, first of all, that a lot of the digitalization agenda, yes, and now we're going into the sort of net zero sustainability agenda, has been driven looking at sort of products and process, and the human element is not at the fore as it needs to be. And anything to do with competence is about essentially human behavior, and that requires having access to knowledge and the data of that human behavior and the activities and actions. It also includes language. It's not an exact science. And AI, particularly technologies in natural language understanding, natural language processing, knowledge engineering, etc., and machine learning, all have real impact and are possible now. There's work going on in the competence domain now where we're leveraging those technologies. And the drivers for that really are, if we can't access the right kind of competency, knowledge and data, then we can't make anything actionable. We can't evidence anything. We can't deal with the rapid evolution of competency. So there's a great need to have more discussion on the need for interoperation of this data and knowledge. We need anything that's a standard or a regulation to do with competence to be machine readable. And some of this needs to be in the what I call in the commons. We need to have common access to this so that people can build applications, like organizations like Peter can leverage that. It doesn't need everyone doing that. So essentially, I think it also, in terms of dealing with lots of the new sort of sustainability competency work that's going on, a lot of this is going to be layered over existing competence standards. How do we do that in a consistent and traceable manner? And if you don't have the machines doing it, it won't be done. Humans make far too many errors. And already, particularly in the built environment, most of the occupational route maps and stuff, say in apprenticeships, for example, don't tally when you put the machines on them. Yes, we've got to be much more granular and dynamic intelligence in terms of making sense of this. And then it's much easier to action, you know, then people can do things. That's in a nutshell, really. So.
Brilliant.
It's very good. Thank you. Peter, how do you think the industry can create a sense of urgency to prioritize competency in a post-Grenfell world?
By reflecting on the GIRI initiative, the Get It Right initiative. If we sit here waiting for secondary legislation, we'll pay the heavy price of this continued underperformance. So the Get It Right initiative places the inefficiencies in the construction sector at a quite awful 20%. That means 1 in 5 projects have to be redone. And I have personal experience of that. The reason I got involved in the Grenfell disaster inquiry was finding myself, I bought 4 new homes in my lifetime. 2 of them were highly explosive. And I referred both of them to the Grenfell disaster inquiry. They could have killed me and my family very easily. And you're talking to an ex-mining engineer and an oil and gas engineer that's been in the Congolese jungle, the northern reaches of in Mongolia, the frozen seas of China, etc. Most dangerous place I've ever been in my life was my own home. So that's why I got involved in the construction sector. I was horrified when I saw the comparison with other sectors and the failure to see any sense of compliance or competency from the glint in the architect's eyes through to hand over to me as the homeowner. And the more I looked into it, the more horrific it was actually. The blame culture that I saw, the failure to accept responsibilities, and the difficulty of actually getting any form of compensation. It cost me an awful lot of money, in the hundreds of thousands of pounds, actually. But there is a tremendous opportunity out there. The government places, or the Get It Right initiative, places the value to the UK economy at over £20 billion a year. That belongs on the bottom lines of all of the companies that are involved. So let's not sit here waiting for secondary legislation, because secondary legislation isn't going to deliver that to the bottom line. We have an urgent need already. And quite apart from the financial aspect of it, secondary legislation shouldn't help, actually. And the reason I say shouldn't is quite interesting. The UK government could have been held responsible by the shareholders of Occidental for the Piper Alpha disaster. And the reason is we used to stipulate the standards by which an asset would be deemed safe. If we go back to that kind of secondary legislation, the prescriptive legislation that says this is how to do it this way, we de facto as a government and us as taxpayers rather, become responsible. And that's, I believe, irresponsible for a government to do. So if you're sitting there waiting to be told how to solve the competency and compliance conundrum, you're probably going to have a long wait because it's the wrong thing to do. Where it will go down is probably the line that it's done in other sectors, where it actually says we as the regulator will look across industry for what we deem to be best practice. We will expect you all to prove why you're not using it. So show us that you are using a LARP principles, show us that you have a system in place, show us that you're running it, you're maintaining it, you're keeping it live. And that's what we've seen elsewhere, and it works. It really does work, and it keeps people on their toes without going down that prescriptive path, because that prescriptive path de facto cannot be maintained as live. It can't stay current with the way the industry moves. So that a LARP principle, that's use of best practice across the sector, is the best and most dynamic way to keep moving forward together.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. That was quite interesting. Would anyone like to comment on that any further? Shall we carry on with the next question?
Quite keen to draft there. Peter, you mentioned the kind of whole sort of end-to-end journey of construction. And I think we definitely work with some very good companies in the construction industry who are choosing contracts on a basis of multiple factors, if you like. But sadly, there's a whole sea or tsunami of people, unfortunately, where they can have their contracts awarded on the basis of being the cheapest price and fulfilling the minimum requirements and regulations. And that fundamentally is an underlying issue within our industry, which other industries have got regulations against doing that. One of the analogies which we quite often get compared to as an industry is the car automation and everything which goes in with the car manufacturers. But if a car manufacturer was producing a car to an MOT standard and was able to sell it as cheap as anything because it hit an MOT standard, we'd sadly be having some terrible vehicles coming onto the marketplace. Reality is that that's not even a consideration for car industries and so on. However, we do have that mentality that doesn't meet the standards, and it's quite regular to go around an exhibition in construction and see taglines like complies with British standard whatever, or complies with regulation part B or CDM or whatever that may be. Well, shouldn't that be a given that's a minimum standard? That's not where we should be aiming. And one of those standards for us, for example, is the amount of bounce or deflection you're allowed on a balcony under Euro codes is, in our opinion, far too lenient. And so we guarantee that we'll halve that amount of deflection. But these sort of things shouldn't be just a small number of people in the industry. It's something which aspirationally we should all be getting towards. And I think personally that in our experience, it actually starts with the contracts, the way the contracts are approached in the first place.
That's not unique to any particular sector in my experience. It's there's a thing called lifetime value, which is something that's incumbent upon every supplier to teach their clients, such that it ends up in the tenders and it gets evaluated as such. So totally agree. I'm an ex-buyer. That was my job when I was within BP, and I had the misfortune of being the first door on the entry to the department, and I had every salesperson visit me. And as a young kid, I had a £5 million a month budget. So very much sat on the buyer's side and spent the rest of my career sitting on the seller's side. And the thing that's always frustrated me is that misunderstanding that takes place between vendor and buyer on what is the lifetime value, because that should be prescribed in the contract as a measurable in some way, shape or form. And going back to housing, actually, one of the things that we suffer in the UK is we have 2 years within the purchase of buying a house to find any particular fault. That's not a true reflection of the value of the house. And that house should last 100 years. So why are we allowing the builder to get away with whatever they get away with within the first 2 years? And when in my investigations with the 2 properties I was referring to, I ended up taking them all the way to the financial ombudsman and finding they had no teeth either. And there was quite an interesting article by The Guardian saying you had more rights in the UK buying a tin of beans than you do buying a house. So my point is that lifetime value has to represent the lifetime of the product and the value to the client, and that is a challenge. So I've used risk-based economics myself, both as the buyer and as the vendor, to prove that actually whilst the thing that we were providing might be more expensive, from a lifetime value point of view, it was a better option. Go ahead, please, David.
Yeah, I think there's just another aspect to bring in here that, and I was rather shocked when I was talking to a standard setter recently who said to me, what do products have to do with competence? And I said, well, particularly as we're moving to design for manufacturing assembly, MMC, you know, all of these terms and jargons that get muddled up. The product is often the key contextualizing factor for the competence demand. And right at the beginning of a project, that competency demand profile should be explicit, yes, and traceable. And this is the kind of stuff that technology can enable, but it's not in people's thinking. And in a recent Innovate funded project to do with product-based building systems, although the product data is maturing, and if we've got the product data, the product has a function and many functions often, we can interpret what that means in terms of competence. But the data that isn't there is the tasking data. If you ask anybody, give me all of the task statements about assembling that product in that place tomorrow with these installers, they can't give it to you. It's all over the place. And there needs to be some kind of common standard for sharing this. So it's a bit that's been missed in the puzzle, really, because if you don't get those two bits right, you'll never get the competency profile right. So I think this is the, you know, being more product driven, demand driven, you know, outcome driven is very important here, because the link between performance of the end product in a system is multifaceted. Is performance of the task, the procedure, the instrument in the system. You know, we're not living in a simple world any longer. These products are getting more complex, so the competence demands are more complex.
Thank you, Debbie. I think Daniel wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. I want effectively to react, just taking effectively the example that Nick talked about, that was mainly from the facade, considering that standards are not always the solution, only the solution to assess the system that is implemented at the end. As we have from standard, from DBS 8414, where we are testing a blind solution, so blind facade, where facade is not at all representative from that. There is many construction details that may be worse and create lots of issues on the facade, and this is not at all taken into account either in the BS 8414 or in the classification reports coming from the BR 135. And when we are looking at on site what has been done, we are often far from what has been tested or what has been classified, because you cannot classify this kind of facade with the current tools. So there is a big gap, and this gap is absolutely today should be assessed by effectively installers of facade. So knowing that, as it was said just before, there is a need of knowledge and a need of experience. The knowledge is more and more reduced on fundamental knowledge is reduced on schools, with lots of training, internship time or less fundamental time. On the other hand, the experience is also really reduced. They have no time to learn in many cases. So effectively, there is a large gap from that. On the last point from Peter on facade, it's always very complex to take into account lifetime for the facade, how they behave in the time we don't know really. For example, for wooden facade, it's really complex to see what should be the behavior of the same facade 10, 15, 20 years after it has been implemented. So we need to go on the main issue that we cannot only work with standards that are just representing the past or not the future. So standard is one, but it's not enough. We need absolutely to include also any kind of expertise on this in order to reinsure and to ensure that the fire safety level will be reached.
Thank you. David, can you explain the Joint Competency Initiative and its role in improving the facade industry?
Yes, the Joint Competency Initiative evolved out of a white paper produced by the Tier 1s when they realised that liability was going to be a really, really serious issue, with not just for the companies themselves, but for the individuals, you know, that are managing the processes, not necessarily the chief execs or whatever, but the individual managers who are tasked with undertaking some operation in there. You know, a few decades back, within local authority, well, the audit commission was abolished. Basically, it's a part of this sort of many decades of deregulation, of moving away, and so in local authority, we lost all of the internal audit process, and you know, to actually look at itself and monitor itself, the clerks of works. When I first entered local authority many years ago, I couldn't move for the amount of clerks of works there. Every project that we dealt with had a clerk of works, and you know, when we issued, when my team issued a variation order or an architect's instruction, they're called different things, but it's the same document, basically, same process. When something is altered like that, there was a monitoring officer, not necessarily a technical officer in construction, would actually say, David, can you come over and speak to us? Why is your guy now varying the contract? Why couldn't you get it right in the first place? Why are you now changing this product for that product and all this sort of stuff? You know, it came to me clearly that when you've got a project, you should understand that project. When you're designing that project, you should be competent enough to actually understand what is required, specify that project, tender that project. You know, don't accept alternatives because the final certificate, I think many architects are now realizing that when they issue the final certificate, they're actually certifying that everything in that job is compliant. But of course, they've altered things. And of course, the JCI, the Joint Competence Initiative, people that have realized this. So we all came together. We picked up the fears, and there was a talk given up. We picked this up, and we came together at Mishkondarea's offices, held a round table. It was well attended, over 200 people were there, and we're now evolving into working groups, looking at all the various factors of this. It's quite an interesting project. It's evolving, so it's moving well. Working groups are moving. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Peter?
Thanks, David. Actually, we're trying to digitize the processes that you're talking about. So what we're doing is we're taking best practice, placing it in the hands of the individual. And that best practice might come from the supplier. And that then gives us the digital traceability required of the golden thread. So for instance, we're talking to Tata and Sumitomo, two of the biggest steel manufacturers, and they complain that they often have tubulars sent back to them because they're in disrepair, having left the factory in perfect order. And so we're able to capture the digital evidence that it's left the factory okay, match that against the scope of work that should be, we write it down in a document, let's digitize it, let's get the suppliers to demonstrate that they've met that, provide the evidence that they've met it, so that even before it arrives at the site, we know it's fine. So that's one aspect of it. And the other one is just thinking about black mold, for instance. So we can take a best practice for black mold and we can cascade that across the entire sector and say, right, this is what black mold looks like. This is what it doesn't look like. These are the causes, evaluate those and let us know as a small body of people sitting somewhere remotely looking at that digital evidence, this is worth paying attention to. We don't need to bother with that. And so, for instance, we've taken the Health and Safety Executives checklist for fire doors. That's available now to anybody that wants it. And rather than, I think it was Fireco told me it would take many decades to evaluate the current stock of fire doors the way we do it now. So what we can do is we can digitally provide that to the sector and say, doesn't matter if you're a cleaner, doesn't matter if you're a caretaker, a plumber, or a joiner, just walking past that door, just have a look. This is what good looks like. This is what bad looks like. Just let us know. So we can have a much reduced cost and much more dynamic workforce that's multi-skilling through this information that they've got, which leans back on what you were saying earlier, David, about that body of knowledge and that QA/QC that takes place. Because the big picture is we don't have the people anymore. And we're not going to have the people anymore because we've got the baby boomers. Every sector on the planet is fighting over the same dwindling resource. And so what we have to accept is that we're going to have to do things better, quicker, and faster than we've ever done in history before.
Thank you.
Peter, could I just jump in there? I mean, it's interesting. I entirely agreed, but the rest of the system needs to move quicker as well. You know, I can go and query because I've got all of the occupational standards related to apprenticeships in the built environment in machine readable format. The word mold only appears in 2 statements, yes, out of over 5,000 statements, yes, to do with competence. So, you know, this is the problem as well, because everybody should have at least an awareness of finding mold. So what we need to do is have mechanisms to update those standards, yes, which are influencing those coming into the trade or being upskilled as well, yes. I found that pretty shocking that I could only find 2.
Absolutely. And that's the power of the digital environment, actually,
Yeah.
Debbie. We have one organization that says, actually, this is the best way of dealing with that. We can distribute that across the entirety of the sector in seconds.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Nick, I think you wanted to add on this point as well.
Yeah, it's a good point both Debbie and Peter have made there. I think what we've certainly found with them, we've implemented a system called Passport, which is end-to-end traceability throughout every stage of balcony. So you can trace back a balcony to see who manufactured it, what day, where it was made, who made it, what training they had, and so on, all the way through back through the process. And I guess there's 2 big advantages we see from it. Is that you've got, by having the data there, you can work out and improve processes. And as you said, Peter, early on, it's a big opportunity for construction to actually work out and improve your processes there. But the second thing is accountability. And those 2 things shouldn't have been really a new thing. We've all been obliged to hand over documents at the end of the building. Obviously, we've got the golden thread coming now with a digital requirement there. But this whole process, actually, by scrutinising everything you're doing, it gives you peace of mind and makes sure that you're actually catching things at an early stage. That if for example, you assembled a whole balcony and then checked it off and found a problem in the first stage of it, so this we can do about rectifying it. Whereas if you're checking it stage by stage, there's so much more benefit which comes out of these digital systems as well. In terms of, I guess my point really is, we haven't found it to be a burden. Yes, we've spent money implementing it, and it's been hard pushing it through initial stages and getting everything rolling with clients and the interface there on sites with installers and so on. But there's so much benefit of actually digitizing and introducing those levels of accountability and that level of information which you can then drill into and work out what's happening at different stages and how you can improve that process.
The other part that I find really exciting is the ability to upskill and multi-skill people in the moment. Because if we can deliver on any device to an individual at the point of action, the information pertinent to them, so a box T boiler, a Valor boiler, whoever the manufacturer might be, this is how you do this, rather than them wasting ages on YouTube going through adverts trying to figure out which is the right advice, or reading manuals that by and large are pretty useless. If we can break those down into constructive bullet points that can be measured, then we get far greater efficiency. We have that opportunity to deliver in the moment relevant, pertinent training from the people that really know how to do this.
in the same condition, I would like to react when you said effectively better and quicker, because mainly this is Nick knows that also the modular building at the time being, where you can build effectively much quicker, but also much better, because you can install the product in manufacturers where implemented in the second phase. The solutions are often robust, but on the other hand, there are also there are very sensitive points that should be absolutely assessed. And you cannot assess them with the current standard. It's another way we should assess them. So this kind of evolution shall be taken into account also in the standardization process, on the testing process.
Thank you.
To remind me of Daniel, I meant to mention when we were talking about testing earlier, the emphasis seemed to be on products. One of the outturns of the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico was test the person, and test the person using scenarios before they go to work. So we built a simulated environment. I'll use a car as an analogy. So before a person gets in the car, we set them off through a set of checks and balances to make sure they're okay. Let them drive for a little while, pause it and say, what's the speed limit? Let them drive a bit longer and then ask them what road sign they just passed. All the time the system is scoring them. And then it points them to e-learning opportunities as to how to improve. That's a very scalable solution. So we can use video. This is how to install a boiler. This is how to put the felting on a roof. This is how to do the insulation, and test people. But take away that failure capability in there and only point out opportunities for improvement, which is quite critical, because otherwise we have this dearth of talent. The government's talking about bringing certification in, which I think is probably a mistake, because we have enough problem attracting talent already. So let's not make it worse. Let's point them to opportunities for development and improvement and help them along that journey.
Great, Peter.
Yeah, for sure, that's clear. In technologies, there are development of systems to have all the data that may exist in the building. So you have effectively smoke exhaust that is connected. You have the detection. You may have the sprinklers. You may have automatic doors. You may all of the information that are recorded and are reported to the central room, where you have someone that should be able to read this information. And in many conditions, effectively, it's a person that is not able to read the information. And we had large fires occurred due to that. I don't want to speak about Notre Dame, but there were many issues about this. But we had also very large fires in car parks, for example, where the guy that was behind effectively screens were not able to interpret all the information that was in the screen. And then you lose all your system that you have implemented. So effectively, persons have a large impact on fire safety of constructions, and we shall absolutely take that into account.
Yeah.
Peter, I was going to add to your point as well, is that it's really important that training is relevant to them. I know when the CRO card was withdrawn from the CSCS, that they recommended our balcony installers to do an NVQ in carpentry. Well, it's about as relevant as it gets, because the reality is that we're not allowed to use timber on balconies. Well, we've obviously introduced our own training, but it's really important that you've got that theory-based training, you've got the practical aspects of it as well, how to handle the equipment on balconies and that sort of thing, and that you're testing and upskilling people in that process. I think there's where that merges together with me in terms of product innovation and so on, and testing around products, is ideally we want competent people upskilled in what they're doing, but also products which make those processes simpler. So even if you don't have a extremely competent, knowledgeable person who's been in the industry for many years and is very good at what they do, the product still gets installed the right way, and the application of it and the way it interfaces with other things as well isn't compromised on that.
Pepe?
Yes, I'd just like to pick up on 2 points, Nick's point on upskilling. We need a more modern definition of upskilling than the current one, because really upskilling should be a kind of evolution of your competency profile, covering acquisition, application, appreciation and depreciation of competence across all the dimensions of competence. We need much more intelligent ways of doing that. But also just picking up on Daniel's point about interpretation. We are now in the new era of having to have new mechanisms, use the AI, etc., in terms of knowledge management, because interpretation in terms of competence is a vital capability, and also allowing that interpretation to be context aware and to give people simple interfaces. In some of the capability we've built, you can put in, I've got this project and we need to complete these tasks. What are the competencies that are relevant to that? Put in your own competency profile or put in a job description and find out. Just easy free text or voice. I think we've got to realize as well that the world's moving quickly. We won't need to do this all in terms of text any longer. A 59-year-old roofer is not going to give you a CV to find out what upskilling he's need, but he might tell you a bit about himself. So we need to be multimodal as well in all of this, and that's coming very quickly.
Yes, in fact, on the tail of that, our institute is working on looking at this. It's a void that has been left in part of the industry with the CRO, the construction related operative. You know, they're not construction operatives that per se, but they're fulfilling work that may be cleaning ductworks, and I'm involved with the NADUC, which is the National Association of Ducting Experts that clean a lot of these things, like the KFC kitchens, you know, the commercial kitchens and the Burger Kings. We've seen some horrific fires where those fire systems of the flue systems taking these greasy gases out to open air have ignited, because the ductwork is sort of thick with burnable, flammable fuel. So, you know, there is an important point there that we need to fill that area. Now, with the demise of the CRO card and moving these sort of skill cards into the CSCS, where the CSCS are now saying to battle-hardened professionals that have been doing it for 40 and 50 years, you've now got to do MVQs, and a lot of these people haven't got MVQs, you know. So they've come to us to have a look at this void that's been left. It's not challenging the CSCS card, but we're looking at alternatives for through all the assessment of competence to actually see whether we can produce some sort of viable alternative to help these people into the industry. The CRO card is going to be devoid from next year, so there is an urgency on this. It's almost very similar to the revocation of European law and all of this sort of stuff. We've got some sunsets where we're heading towards that are going to cause industry massive problems, and we've got to pick those up. And I think what you're doing, Debbie, with artificial intelligence and things like that, there's a conversation that we hopefully can have in the short future, but see where we can do what we can do jointly on this.
Thank you, David. I'm just gonna give this last one to Peter quickly before we do a quick summary of today's event.
Just following on from what you just said there, David. So Debbie's working on the AI for the data collection. At the opposite end, we're taking the data that Debbie's organisation produces in terms of competency frameworks, etc., and turn it into actions that are then monitored. But just during COVID, we were picked up by PepsiCo. They had absenteeism ranging at about 40% in its factories in the UK during a period when we were eating more crisps than we'd ever eaten before. And we took 450 brand new employees, upskilled them, turned them into what they call trained, safe and capable in 2 weeks. Their norm was 10 weeks, so an 80% improvement. So within the UK alone, we're gathering 20,000 data points a month with PepsiCo. So we're able to use that with artificial intelligence to say to them, carry on doing what you're doing. And on this particular product line, producing Doritos, you are likely to have this problem with that equipment, with this shift and that person. So it gets incredibly powerful very, very quickly. So it's that as Siemens Gamesa asked us, they're the world's largest producer of wind towers. They said, we want you to tell us where our next accident is going to be or where our next loss is going to be. And that's what we're working on. The power of this information is transformational. So I mentioned the Get It Right initiative, 20% of budget is available now to everybody's bottom line. The next step is predicting those regular day-by-day losses, those minuscule little interactions that go wrong and getting those to the bottom line as well. I see that as a tremendous opportunity. So my final comment would be that the opportunity surrounding competency is absolutely enormous, and the burden that it brings is minuscule by comparison.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I would like to thank all of our speakers for their insightful contribution for today's event on building competency in the construction industry. Before we wrap up, I would like to ask each of our panelists for a quick 10-second takeaway on the importance of competency in construction. And let's start with Debbie on that, please.
Yes, I think I just get back to the bottom line. At the moment, training is a cost, yes. If you have decent organizational and supply chain competency management, and you have those up-to-date competency profiles of your workers and the tasks that they're doing, etc., that becomes an asset. It's human capital, and therefore it puts value on your business. So, you know, competence has value and meaning, and those are the things you need to be conscious of. There's a big ROI in this.
Thank you. Daniel?
In fact, that there is an increased risk within the buildings. With new batteries, we will have an increased number of fires, an increased emission of fires within dwellings. So statistically and probabilistically, any mistake will be more visible in the future. So it's why effectively we need absolutely to have better constructions, and so competencies has to be effectively increased a lot in order to avoid a disaster.
Thank you, Daniel. Nick, would you like to go next, please?
I quite liked what Debbie mentioned a bit earlier on about upskilling and so on. It reminds me of a quote, which is that if the pace of change internally is not the same as it is externally, becoming extinct. That applies to me as an individual, but also us as a company. And it's pretty critical that you know what is changing and that you're continually improving competency. It's not a stagnated thing that you've got a certificate on the wall which proves you're competent. And the second part of that is that in terms of adopting things in construction and so on, if you're wanting a quicker, easy way to becoming more competent, one of the easy way is continually obviously engaging with RISB. We've got a good platform there. But in terms of the actual products, manufacturing off-site is normally on the basis of standardizing, simplifying, de-skilling. All those principles are great for competency. Certainly have another consideration of MMC and those kind of products. It doesn't mean that you have to go to boxes as an architect and to square everything square and identical. This is much more about kind of looking for the processes and the benefits which that whole industry of offsite brings.
Thank you, Nick. David, would you like to go next, please?
Yes, our institute are actually members of the Get It Right initiative, the GIRI, and we fully embrace what they're doing. You know, competence and quality doesn't actually have to cost anything. In fact, it's what I call cost positive. And I've spoken over many years to contractors on this. Pick up the rusty nails off the site and use them again. You can still hammer them into bits of wood. Pick up the half bricks that the bricklayer has thrown off the scaffolding, because a course of brickwork doesn't exist without a half brick in there. So clean the bricks and use them. You're talking about saving money and things like that. So competence, actually, when you get that, engender that culture, cost savings will come. And of course, with the tier ones are working, and you made the point, Peter, about the huge sort of percentages of loss and waste and everything that Giri has identified. Many of the tier one contractors are working on single digit figure profitability. And of course, when they have these losses, unless they do that, it then forces the industry into that litigious sort of stage where they're sort of kicking subcontractors to reduce the quality and what we call value engineering. Is it value? Is it engineering? No, it's just cost cutting and whatever, by a different word. So, the other point is, of course, the industry is in a mess with the lack of monitoring, with the lack of sort of audit. So I think that layer has to get somehow put back into the supply chain. And with what you're doing in Sapphire Balconies, Nick, knowing and how you work across your whole supply chain is exemplary. What you do, everyone is part of the whole. It's that sort of you feed into the whole thing, and you're getting results. Look at the metrics that you're achieving. You're getting pride within your team that they're fitting massive amounts of balconies. God knows how they achieve that. They achieve that through competence, but they also have the culture to want to do it, to move forward. They're not being forced to do it. So there is this cultural change that we need, this paradigm shift in the industry that I'm hoping now that is going to come through with what we're doing. But Dame Judith Hackett, when she wrote, put the first, if you go to the opening paragraphs of her report.
David, could I just give my apologies? I'm supposed to be in another meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you all. I really have to.
We will need to wrap it up now.
Okay, but all I was going to say on the tail end of that is Judith Hackett did say, look, guys, don't wait for the government to tell you what to do. You know what to do. Get competent. Do it. Final word.
Right. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. It seems quite interesting, and I'm sure there's a lot more to share and discuss. We'd like to encourage you to book on to further learning or our upcoming events and access our podcast at www.resi.build. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.